I'm just going to talk a little bit about the energy sector and some issues that we see. I have 6 things to say. First of all, some good news, then some bad news, 2 opportunities, and 2 threats. So the good news is that we are seeing increased investment in upstream gas. This has been a crucial issue for our economy for the last few years, and we're beginning to see that turnaround. That's good news. The bad news, particularly for the government and the Minister of Finance, sitting directly in front of me, is that doesn't necessarily translate directly into significant increases in government revenue from that new investment. In terms of the opportunities, I want to talk a little bit about energy efficiency, because I think there's a specific opportunity in the area of energy efficiency which can help reduce waste and help our economy. And I want to talk about services, energy services and the ability to export services. And then I want to just talk about 2 threats. These are long-term threats which we need to take into account. They're beyond the political cycle, but they're things which a country has to take into account. And one of them is the peak oil demand, and the other one is the fact we have an aging population. So, the good news. There have been some very positive developments in the gas industry in the last few months. And we have some massive investment commitments that have been made by the major oil and gas companies. These add up to approximately $10 billion worth of investment. That is a very large number, and it's very good that investment is coming into the economy. That's over the next 4 or 5 years. And so that, in the short term, we could see some increases in production. Not major increases in production, but some increases in production. And that will have a positive influence on the country's GDP figures. But we need to put that into a context. When we look at, this was a graph which we had commissioned, or the study we had commissioned at the end of 2016 on how Trinidad's gas production has looked to date and what the projections were going forward. So you'll see there the huge increase in gas production which happened in the late 90s through into the early 2000s, a small plateau, and then a very steep fall off which the country experienced from around 2013. A very significant decrease in gas production which has affected our country very deeply. We talk a lot about prices, but actually the production aspect of what's happened in the sector has been a huge issue for us. What you see there, the little bit of yellow there, were the projects which had been sanctioned. So those are projects which were in execution to bring new gas production on at that time at the end of 2016. So that would be things like the Juniper project and the Sircan project, which had been sanctioned. So the investments were being made, but yet we weren't seeing the production then. So this was presented at our conference in January, created a lot of interest. People started calling it Mount Trinidad, and because it really shows the challenge which you face as a gas economy, whereas if you don't have new projects on, your gas production will be falling. This is the down escalator which Minister Franklin Khan often likes to talk about, and the challenge in a gas economy is you're always trying to run up an escalator which is going down, which is as your production falls. So if we fast forward from the end of 2016 to now, this is what the new figures from Rystad from the same consultants now look like. You'll see some of the areas which were shown as sanctioned projects, sanctioned but not yet in production, have now come into production. So that's essentially Juniper, Sircan, are beginning to have come into production. And you're seeing some new projects being sanctioned as well, which will be coming into production 2019 to 2020. That's for the Angelin project and a few others as well. And we've had some discoveries as well, which is the green showing there. So obviously they haven't yet been sanctioned for development. But you can see that has flattened out the decline and has a small little increase in the next few years. But if we don't bring new projects on, you're back into a decline again. And it's also not taking us back up to the 4 billion cubic feet of gas per day, which we actually need to meet all of the demand which exists at Point Lisas and through Atlantic. There's a large hole that we're trying to climb back out of, and we've only made the first little steps out of that hole. There is gas available which can come into that. The discoveries could be brought forward if the right things are done. You can bring the gas in from Venezuela as well, and that can help change the picture. So this is always, as you see, this is how it changed between end of 2016 and now. This is a dynamic picture, so it's always changing as new investment decisions are made and new things and new discoveries are made. But this is the essential challenge which we face in a gas-based economy. You need to constantly bringing new fields and being sanctioned, bringing in development and new discoveries, and we can't stop. That downward escalator is running, and we're on it. If we don't keep running up it, we're going to be going backwards. Okay? So, but the little hump up there, that's the good news. The bad news, I think, for the central government revenue is that we're unlikely to see significant increases in government revenue from the energy sector in the medium term, in the next couple of years. This is just the reality, because the low price environment is continuing, and we're seeing some increases, but I don't think we're seeing massive increases in prices. And the flip side of having that large amount of investment dollars come in is that they're also, because you have high capital investment, there are a lot of allowances which also come into play, which means that those get offset against the tax. And also the companies have carried forward tax losses from the last couple of years, this very rough period we've been in. So we cannot expect, even though we're going to have some GDP growth, even though production is going back up, even though we're having some recovery in prices, we cannot expect significant increases in government revenue from the energy sector for the next few years. That's the reality which the country is facing. So I hear some people trying to celebrate when they hear new discoveries. It's not time to celebrate yet. So that was the bad news. Now, the two opportunities I wanted to talk about. First one is energy efficiency. Now, we hear a lot about renewables, but I think there's actually something which needs to come before renewables, which is being more efficient in how we're using the electricity we're generating and how we're using the gas which goes into electricity. There's a massive opportunity to increase efficiency in the power generation sector in Trinidad and Tobago. If we did that, we can reduce the gas use that's going to electricity generation at the moment and put that into petrochemicals, and I'll have a slide that shows that. So that's the power generation side. But if you come to the commercial buildings, the manufacturing, people's homes, even there, even with our extremely low energy prices, we need to understand that Trinidad's electricity prices are some of the lowest in the entire world. Okay? But even with those very, very low prices, there are still significant savings that can be made from energy efficiency upgrades. We have seen one project which on government-owned municipal buildings was with very simple upgrades and simple energy management programs was achieving 30 to 50% reductions in their electricity bills. And this is simple things like having programs to turn lights off at night. Fixing air conditioning is a huge cost on a lot of commercial buildings in Trinidad. People don't realize it, but air conditioning systems have been very badly implemented, particularly a lot of the new buildings in the building boom we had in the mid-2000s were poorly constructed, and so we are venting cold air out into the atmosphere. Fixing those little things can reduce people's electricity bills very significantly. But electricity pricing also needs to be addressed. We cannot go on with these extremely low electricity pricing. At the moment, what's happening is the national gas company is subsidizing the country's low electricity pricing because the low price gas that they have to sell to T&Tech. That has to change. We need to just bite the bullet there and look at the reality of our electricity pricing, as we have done with transport fuels. Just to show you how the significance of energy efficiency upgrading, what it means for the national gas company and hence for all of us, because as we saw some figures before, NGC is an extremely important contributor to the national revenue, not just to the taxes it pays, but also to the dividends that it pays. At the moment, NGC has about 17% of its sales going into the power generation sector and 77% into the petrochemicals and about 6% into the light manufacturing sector. If we could reduce that by about a third, which you could easily do with energy efficiency upgrades, that additional gas, which in the moment is very, very cheap gas, which NGC is not even being paid for, but they're having to supply to T&Tech to go to the power generation sector. If instead that could go into the petrochemical sector, that is a lot of additional revenue which we can bring into the country. That means that you have more gas going to the petrochemical sector. That means Forex, because the petrochemical sector is exporting ammonia and methanol, and it means more profits for them, more taxes for the government, more profits for NGC, more taxes from NGC. So energy efficiency is the first part of that, and then as time goes on, as electricity demand goes up, we also need to start substituting in renewable energy as well. So if we did those two things, we could significantly reduce the amount of gas going to power generation, which is just very sensible for our economy. The other opportunity I wanted to talk about was energy services. So we're spending, there's going to be about $10 billion US worth of capital investment in Trinidad and Tobago's upstream energy sector in the next 4 or 5 years. If we can increase the amount of that capital investment which is spent in Trinidad and Tobago, that really helps our economic growth. That's through local content policies. We have to fix things around, for example, the platform fabrication industry. Seeing platforms now being fabricated in Mexico rather than being fabricated in Trinidad and Tobago is not good for our economy. So if we want the value added out of that investment, we need to have local content increased. That needs a lot of different policies in a lot of different areas. The industrial relations part of it is important, but it's not the only thing as well. But it's not just activity in Trinidad and Tobago. There's a huge amount of activity across this entire region at the moment. This is a hot region in the world in the oil and gas sector. There's been a major oil find in Guyana. A lot of that activity is being serviced out of Trinidad. That is going to continue. There's exploration activity going on in Suriname. There's exploration activity going on off the northeast coast of Brazil. There's exploration in Grenada, exploration activity in Barbados, in Jamaica. These are all potential areas where Trinidad should be servicing. We have offshore gas developments in Colombia and in Venezuela. Trinidad needs to position itself as the hub to service all of this activity because we have the companies who can do it, we have the skills, we have the knowledge and the expertise. It's a very obvious area where we should be putting some emphasis. And I still have to say I still get confused why this energy services area does not get highlighted as a potential area for economic development for the country. Not just internally for local content, but also for exports. Threats. So as I said, two threats I'll talk about. One is the energy transition and peak demand for oil. There's a lot of different projections and they will all be wrong, but this is one which I picked because I liked it because it was going out to 2050. A lot of the other projections go just to 2030. This was done by a very well-respected group, DNV, looking at the energy transition. And what you see there is that they're predicting that really after 2030, global demand for primary energy actually slows down and actually begins to decrease slightly as the world gets more efficient in how it uses energy, and also how population increase actually by the middle of the century begins to not be as fast as it's been for the last century. And a lot of what you'll see is a lot of wind and solar, the renewable energies areas growing fast and displacing some of the other areas. Gas, natural gas, which is the blue there, holds up pretty well. In fact, goes on increasing, and by 2050 in their projections is actually the major source of energy. So Trinidad is lucky that we're a gas economy, not so much an oil. You see that the coal and the oil is where there's significant losses in demand according to these projections, and most of the projections are showing something very similar. The exact timings of these things are all a little different. So if we drill down to oil specifically, because of a lot of predictions now around the rise of electric vehicles, people are seeing oil's preeminent role as a transport fuel, which is the bottom of the wedge there, being lost by sometime in the middle of the next decade. and increasingly people using electric vehicles instead. And then so that means that you're seeing that fall away in demand for oil products for transport. So then that is seeing this huge reduction in demand for oil globally. That doesn't mean the world stops producing oil. It means the high-cost producers are no longer able to profitably produce oil, and the low-cost producers will continue. Exactly the same thing has happened with coal. So that means Trinidad has to position itself, if it wants to go on with an oil industry, as a lower-cost producer. And we need to take that into account in all our discussions around what we're doing with the oil industry. If we're a high-cost producer, we will fall out of the industry, and we will be left with oil in the ground in Trinidad and Tobago in 20 and 30 years' time. Just like South Wales, Yorkshire has hundreds of years' worth of coal left in the ground, but they can't produce it profitably. So that's if we don't take this seriously, that's our future. There's massive implications of that for Petrotrin. The last threat, in inverted commas, is just the reality which we're facing is our aging population. I suspect Roger Hussein might talk about this a little bit more, so I'll just be very quick with it. But at the moment, we have about 4.5 people in our sort of working population age bracket, which is between 16 years old and 60 years old, compared to every person age over 60. By 2063, if you project forward, that goes to 1.6 people in that working age compared to every pensioner. That means a huge burden on the working population for Social Security, and we're seeing these problems already featuring for National Insurance Board and for pension plans generally. This is an issue which I think we have to think about very carefully as a country. It either means we have to put lots and lots of effort into being much more productive from the existing labor force, or we have to increase the age of retirement, or we have to have in-migration of additional people into that labor force. And I think there's a whole issue around migration in Trinidad and Tobago which we don't talk about. And I say this as an immigrant, let me say that. I moved here 20 years ago. There's a way people talk about migration as if it's always somehow adding a burden to the state rather than adding productive people to an economy. And I think we need to shift that way of thinking. I think it comes out of having a hydrocarbon-based economy where you think that people are all recipients of things instead of generators of wealth. But I think we can shift that way of thinking. We might shift how we're thinking about this issue and think about how we deal with this aging population issue. So that's it, just to summarize then. So there's good news that we're seeing investment happening. The bad news is that that's not going to result in significant increases in tax receipts from the energy sector in the short term. There are significant opportunities in energy efficiency for the economy. There's significant opportunities in exporting services, so not just concentrating on manufacturing alone, but also exporting services. And we have some long-term threats which we need to take seriously around peak oil demand and around our aging population.